Welcome back to Inside City Hall. As we've been telling you, Mayor de Blasio today released a new 10-year plan outlining the future of our city's massive public housing system. The Next Generation NYCHA plan is designed to further the mayor's goal of preserving affordable housing by helping the city's underfunded housing authority better meet the needs of the 400,000 plus city residents who rely upon it every day. Joining me now to talk more about the plan are Shola Olatoye, the chair of the New York City Housing Authority, and Alicia Glenn, the deputy mayor for Housing and Economic Development. Thank you both for being here, and congratulations. I know this is a lot of work.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming us.
And Deputy Mayor, how does this fit into the larger housing plan? I mean, you had some statistics in here, and I try to follow this stuff. I was a little blown away at just how important this is to the affordable housing strategy.
Well, I think, about a year ago, I was here to talk about the housing plan for New York, which was the mayor's comprehensive view of affordable housing. And you at the time, and many people asked, what about the housing authority? Where does the housing authority fit into your vision for affordable housing in New York City? And it's taken us really a year of incredibly hard work to figure out what has really been going on at the Housing Authority, understand what the systemic problems are, and then begin to craft this very comprehensive solution to fixing NYCHA. Why, you ask? How does this fit in? Over 400,000 New Yorkers live in the Housing Authority. 200,000 of those folks are seniors and children, some of our most vulnerable folks, people who have obviously very little income ability. It is also the place where we have the most housing stock for lowest income families. So I think it's 75% of apartments for $500 or less are in the Housing Authority. We've spent billions of dollars over the years to create this amazing resource. New York City was the birthplace of public housing. It was always the jewel in the public housing crown, and we understand how important it is to maintain it as part of our affordable housing ecosystem and make the kind of investments in it, because let's face it, we could never replace that stock. It is really an asset that is irreplaceable and plays an enormous role in our housing ecosystem.
Yeah, I find this really helpful, and I would urge all of our viewers to take a look at this report just for all of the facts that are in it, just chock full of information. I mean, one of the things that jumped out at me is that only 12% of residents receive public assistance, which runs counter to many of the stereotypes that people have about public housing. About a quarter of your staff in the Housing Authority actually are public housing residents. Average household income of $23,000, which is rather low. It's about half of the median. On the other hand, again, only 12% receiving public assistance. So people, this is working poor.
These are working New Yorkers. These are families. These are nurses' assistants, teachers' assistants. Actually, 30% of families who report income out of NYCHA actually work in the healthcare industry. So there's a huge number of people who are working, but they are working poor. And the Housing Authority has been, like it has been for generations of the past, has been a pathway to opportunity for so many families. And I think what this administration and what Next Generation NYCHA presents is an opportunity towards financial sustainability so that we can ensure that these buildings are around for another generation.
Let me go through a couple of the charts, and then we'll talk about the numbers and the plan and how you plan to bring this about. One of the big important facts is that most 60% of the housing stock is 50 years old or older. And that shows which ones were built by the city, which were built by the state, which were built with federal funds. And then your operating reserves, and this is a sort of a key number, and this was really just in the last few years, that operating reserves dipped below a level that is considered adequate to support the biggest landlord in the city.
That's right. And the Housing Authority utilized a number of tactics to essentially staunch the bleeding over the course of the last year. And the reality is the status quo cannot continue. We have about a month of revenues, of cash on hand to cover our monthly expenses. And clearly that's inadequate for any best practice or any best practices within the business industry. So we have to take some big and hard steps and make hard decisions in order to find a path towards financial sustainability so that we can deal with the larger capital need, which is estimated at about $16 billion, nearly $17 billion, to bring our 178,000 apartments into a state of good.
Yeah, that is extraordinary. In fact, there's a chart showing the dip in federal capital funding. I mean, for folks who are wondering why the mayor's always going down to Washington and on the road, well, this is part of the reason, right? You've got federal funding dropping year after year after year, and now amounting to a $1 billion loss. and this is capital funds that are needed to fix the roofs, fix the elevators, stop the mold, and do other
But you have
basics.
to remember that unlike the city's affordable housing programs, the Housing Authority was always premised on the fact that the federal government would be providing both operating subsidy to manage the units day to day, as well as capital money to fix the normal wear and tear. And so basically, since the 80s, you've seen a steady decline in federal support. And so that would mean that the city would have to take the resources that they have been using for our own affordable housing agenda and reallocate them to NYCHA. And so what we've had to do is really, peel back the onion and say, where are the opportunities for us to identify cost savings, revenue strategies, et cetera, so that the Housing Authority, as its own independent corporation, can start operating in the black and then access their own capital to fix the entire portfolio. So that's really why we think this is so important, because we don't want to steal from Peter to pay Paul. We have a very aggressive affordable housing agenda that the mayor is already devoting unprecedented amounts of city capital towards.
There was a startling line in the report saying that receivership is a real possibility, and by that I assume you mean federal receivership by the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
That's right, and we've seen this story happen across the country in other housing authorities that have either failed to transform or figure out ways in which to diversify funding and take care of its housing stock. That will not happen in this administration, and I think what the plan does is present a set of very strategic initiatives. This is not a kitchen sink approach. These are very well analyzed set of initiatives that get us to that point of financial health so that we can deal with the larger needs of the portfolio.
Okay, the first and maybe the biggest big ticket item is doing away with or waiving the payments in lieu of taxes. Most government buildings don't pay taxes to the city. This is clearly, it's sort of city run, state organized and federally funded, and it's a hybrid monster.
Jurisdiction.
But clearly it's
Yes.
public. We call
Yes.
it public housing,
Yes.
and yet they've been paying since the 40s.
Right. I mean, what's really ironic about that is that we have an enormous affordable housing stock in New York City that are owned by a series of nonprofit owners and mission-based for-profit developers, and they don't pay taxes for affordable housing. So just think about how crazy that is, that for close to over 50 years now, the Housing Authority has been paying the city taxes when we haven't held other affordable housing providers to that same standard. So that's a critical, real paradigm shift. Likewise, we don't charge, Starrett City or other large housing complexes for their police payments, for policing. It's part of the bargain. And so I think the mayor's made a very clear statement, which is the Housing Authority is part of New York City. It's in every neighborhood. Right. It's from Staten Island to the Bronx. It's from the Upper East Side to East New York. I mean, this is part of the fabric of New York City, and we have to embrace that.
So that will save $30 million a year, which is about a third of the operating deficit. You also have a proposal to move hundreds, if not thousands, of staff members of NYCHA to other agencies. How would that work?
So NYCHA has historically had a structural operating deficit, and we've identified that as largely being within our central office. And so this mayor is very committed to ensuring that city employees continue to be employed and that we are committed to folks' sort of economic prosperity. But also, I think to the deputy mayor's point, integrating NYCHA with the rest of the city. So we will identify a series of administrative functions that we will integrate with other parts of the city, really because we're essentially duplicating efforts, and it would allow us to reduce costs while also improving services to our residents.
And this would involve, again, in the report it says that you'd sort of move people. They would no longer be NYCHA employees. They'd still be working for the city. They might even be doing approximately the same thing.
That's right.
But they'd be employees of different agencies.
That's right.
Is that something that has to get negotiated with the unions?
We certainly are already talking to, and we'll be working with our labor colleagues across the table. We will need them, as well as City Hall, to really begin a very detailed analysis of how this is going to work. And that's why what we've outlined in the plan is an effort that is going to take at least 2 years for us to do this. We don't flip a switch on July 1 and make this happen. It's really going to take a level of interagency collaboration and continued support from the mayor and the deputy mayor to make this all a reality.
Another big ticket item, the back rent that has been owed of $56 million as of the end of 2014. I'm wondering, how does that happen? Any other landlord, you don't pay the rent, eviction proceedings began. Does NYCHA not do that?
I think this reflects just a lack of attention, and I think for us, as we began to look at, as the Deputy Mayor said, peeling apart the onion, sort of where our own internal processes could improve. So, for example, making it easier for residents to pay rent when they actually get paid. So, mailing rent checks or expecting rent to be due when people actually get paid. Making it easier to pay multiple times throughout the month. Making it easier to pay electronically. Really sort of stepping into the 21st century as a modern housing operator is a key goal of the plan. And so, and we will continue to work with the city's HRA for those families who are on public assistance or those families who experience chronic rent delinquency. It has to be a seamless process so that, NYCHA is in the business of housing people, not in evicting people. And so we want to ensure that we are delivering on improved services, but we also can collect rent to help us do that.
And one of the big areas that got a lot of attention, of course, is the prospect of development. And you point out that there's a 20% vacancy rate when it comes to commercial properties and sort of ground level properties and unused community centers and so forth throughout NYCHA. Who are the developers that are going to be coming in? Is it going to be offered just kind of on the market for different stores and so forth, or is there a design process that has to go on first?
Well, so I think you're asking two questions. I think with respect to the ground floor spaces, there's a whole bunch of community spaces that are being set aside for local nonprofit organizations who traditionally not only have they not paid any rent, which is often the correct result, but they've also expected the housing authority to pay the operating expenses. And so we would like to see, and we think it's a fair bargain for our nonprofit and community partners to at least pay for their operating expenses. But we see those community spaces as very valuable and having a benefit to neighborhoods in general. There's also, though, a fair amount of space which is really street-level retail. I see it in my neighborhood. I'm sure you see it in your neighborhood, where we could more actively manage that portfolio of commercial property to make sure that we're actually getting the market rents and collecting them and being really good commercial landlords as well. And so that will be one of the other strategies that will help drive the bottom line here.
And on some of the footprints, there will also be room for new development, and that's going to be all affordable housing or half affordable housing?
So as the Deputy Mayor said, we are a part of the Mayor's Affordable Housing Plan, Housing New York, and his commitment to build or preserve 200,000 units. And so NYCHA will contribute land to that plan of up to 10,000 units of 100% affordable development. And that's a process that we began with residents last summer in 3 communities in a very intensive resident engagement and community stakeholder process. And we will continue that as we continue to roll out those sites. In addition, we're evaluating dozens of sites throughout our portfolio where we will build a 50-50 scenario where 50% will be targeted towards families at a minimum of 60% area median income, so that's families who make $46,000 or less, and 50% market. All of those are, again, sort of strategies, the sum of those strategies are what drive us towards a healthy financial bottom line.
Okay, we're only at the beginning of this, and we only got to touch on a couple of things, but you've got some hard benchmarks in here.
Yes.
We're going to be talking over the months, and you talked about what's going to get done in the first year. We look forward to seeing that happen. And thank you so much for coming in to tell us about it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, State Senate Independent Democratic Conference Leader Jeff Klein will join us from Albany to talk about how the changing power dynamic is affecting the legislative session. Also tonight, Mayor de Blasio says he doesn't need to hold town hall meetings because he already hears from everyday New Yorkers. But some critics disagree. The New York One Wise Guys will weigh in on that and much more. Stay with us.